what would a review actually do? Hasn't the horse bolted in terms of this data that China already has it? Even if you're not signed up to TikTok, and we know so many people are, but your data's already there.
You're absolutely right, Trudy. The horse has bolted, but there should still be very serious consequences for TikTok. If they have broken the law, they should be investigated, prosecuted and fined to the fullest extent possible. And that now amounts to fines of the many millions of dollars. And if they have broken the law, they should be held to account. But of course, that's not where it should end because, as we know, TikTok is not a good faith actor. This is a company that has spied on journalists in the past, lied about it and then been forced to admit it. This is a company which has suppressed content on their platform, which is critical of the Chinese Communist Party. So the business as usual approach to a company like this can't continue, and it really is now time for the Albanese government to act. They've been sitting on 2 reports that recommend action to address TikTok for some time now. The Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity, Claire O'Neill, commissioned her own report. She's had that for almost a year from her own department, has done nothing with it. And they have the benefit of a bipartisan Senate committee report, which I chaired, which made dozens of recommendations of how to protect Australians. All they've done was be one of the last Western governments in the world to ban it from government devices, acknowledging the risk that it poses to government users. But for ordinary Australians, they're not protected in any way from this company.
We'll see where the government goes on that heading into the new year. I want to move on to the comments we saw from Israel's ambassador here yesterday. He's accused the Prime Minister of having a contradictory stance on the Gaza conflict. Is that an assessment that you share?
It's a self-evidently true assessment. On the one hand, the Prime Minister says he doesn't believe that Hamas should continue to govern in Gaza. And on the other hand, he has been lauded by Hamas for calling for an immediate ceasefire because Hamas knows what everyone else should recognise, which is a ceasefire keeps Hamas in control of the Gaza Strip. It keeps them in control of the people of Gaza and to continue to use them as human shields and hostages for their war on Israel. Now, that is an inconsistent and incoherent position, and I think it's driven by the Prime Minister's weakness on national security. I think he is being influenced by the pro-Palestinian supporters of the Labor Party who put immense political pressure on him, and he's bowed to that domestic political pressure instead of standing up for the position that he adopted at the start of the attack on the 7th of October, which is that it is perfectly legitimate and acceptable for Israel to seek to remove Hamas as a threat to its people in perpetuity, because otherwise we'll see events of the 7th of October again and again and again. Hamas has very publicly clearly said that that will continue.
How realistic, though, is it to actually completely crush Hamas? We saw this from Benjamin Netanyahu. He said in the Wall Street Journal, for peace, Hamas must be crushed, Gaza demilitarised and Palestinians de-radicalised. How do you even do that when senior Hamas leadership are in Qatar and that the bombing of Gaza without a safe passage does risk further radicalisation, doesn't it?
Well, it's important, of course, that Israel behaves like a liberal democracy. That's why, people like me support Israel. We want to see Israel uphold those values, but they also have a legitimate military objective here, which is to remove Hamas at least from the Gaza Strip, and that is an achievable military objective. They can be removed from the Gaza Strip. Already very significant damage has been done to Hamas's networks in Gaza. You are right, though, that there are some countries in the region and around the world who do harbour Hamas terrorists and allow them to operate from their jurisdictions, and that is something I think they should reflect on, whether or not they want to continue to facilitate and harbour a terrorist organisation, given the events of 7 October. I think Israel should continue to prosecute this war consistent with international law and remove Hamas, because that is the only way that the Palestinian people and the Israeli people can live in peace and harmony beside each other, which ultimately should end in a stable 2-state solution.
Finally, Newspoll analysis today shows support for Labor dropping in key demographics. The 35 to 49-year-olds and that lead amongst female voters has fallen away. But can you point to something the coalition's done to win these voters back? Or is this voters simply marking Anthony Albanese down?
I think it's 2 things, Trudy. Firstly, we've been brought back into the game by Peter Dutton's leadership. Since the last election, we have been incredibly stable, we've been incredibly united and incredibly disciplined, and that's a great credit to Peter Dutton. That's not something that we were able to do when we were in opposition last time. We had enormous dissent internally in that 2007 to 2009 period, but this is a great contrast. It's a great credit to Peter. But I agree as well that the Albanese government has not lived up to its promise. It's been completely distracted. It's spent its first 18 months being utterly obsessed with with The Voice and dividing Australians. It spent nearly $500 million of taxpayers' money on that. In the middle of a cost of living crisis, when they promised things like cheaper mortgages, cheaper groceries and cheaper petrol, they've delivered nothing of the sort. They've delivered more expensive mortgages, more expensive petrol, more expensive groceries. And Australians are really struggling because the Prime Minister is not focused on them and his priority is not them, it's something else. And so I think that's why this next election will be competitive. We're halfway point of the term. We certainly haven't got it in the bag. We've got a lot more work to do on our side of the fence, but we are competitive and we know what we need to do to get there.
Oh, I note that the PM said the other day we might be 3/4 of the way through the term, so we might actually be heading to the polls towards this time next year. Anyway, we'll see. James Paterson, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Trudy.